The hidden cost of being the strongest person in the room. Have you ever noticed that the people who smile the most often carry the deepest emotional scars? The ones who constantly comfort others are usually fighting battles no one else can see. They listen without interrupting, forgive without being asked, and continue showing kindness long after they've been hurt. Because of that, many people mistake their compassion for weakness. But nothing could be further from the truth. An empath isn't simply someone who cares about other people. They experience emotions on an entirely different level. They notice the sadness hidden behind forced smiles, the anxiety concealed beneath confidence, and the silent struggles that most people overlook. While others hear words, an empath pays attention to tone, body language, and the emotions that remain unspoken. This extraordinary sensitivity is a gift, but it also comes with a price. Over time, empaths naturally become the emotional anchor for everyone around them. Friends call them during personal crises. Family members seek their advice when life becomes difficult. Partners depend on them whenever problems arise. They become the person everyone trusts because they rarely judge and almost always understand. But here's the question. Very few people ever ask, who supports the empath when they're emotionally exhausted? Who notices when they're silently falling apart? The answer is often no one. Because empaths become so focused on healing other people that they slowly forget to care for themselves. They convince themselves that everyone deserves patience. They believe every misunderstanding can be solved with love. Every mistake deserves another chance. And every difficult person is simply carrying hidden pain. While those beliefs come from compassion, they also create dangerous blind spots. Instead of recognizing unhealthy patterns early, they continue investing their energy into people who repeatedly disappoint them. They excuse broken promises. They ignore crossed boundaries. They forgive behaviors that slowly damage their own emotional well-being. At first, these sacrifices seem small. One apology accepted. One disappointment overlooked. One more chance given. But emotional exhaustion isn't created by one major event. It's created by hundreds of tiny moments that quietly pile on top of each other. Every ignored feeling leaves a mark. Every broken promise adds another layer. Every act of disrespect becomes another invisible weight. The frightening part is that this burden grows silently. From the outside, the empath still appears calm, supportive, and emotionally strong. They continue smiling. They continue encouraging others. They continue pretending everything is fine. Meanwhile, inside, something completely different is happening. Their emotional reserves are slowly running empty, and the people around them usually don't notice, because the empath rarely complains. Instead of expressing their pain, they carry it quietly, hoping tomorrow will be different. Unfortunately, tomorrow often looks exactly like yesterday, until one day, the person who always stayed suddenly stops trying. The one who always understood suddenly becomes silent. The one who never gave up quietly walks away without creating a scene. Most people believe relationships end because of one major argument. In reality, an empath's departure usually begins long before anyone notices. In the next part, we'll uncover the silent warning signs that reveal an empath is emotionally checking out, and why most people completely miss them until the relationship has already reached the point of no return. The silent signs an empath is letting go. One of the biggest myths about empaths is that you'll know exactly when they've had enough. Most people imagine an emotional breaking point as a dramatic explosion, raised voices, endless arguments, or an emotional goodbye. But that rarely happens. An empath doesn't usually leave in anger. They leave in silence. Long before they physically walk away, they begin disconnecting emotionally. And because this shift happens gradually, the people around them often mistake it for stress, exhaustion, or a temporary mood. In reality, something much deeper is taking place. The first change is subtle. The empath who once checked on you every morning suddenly forgets. The person who always started conversations begins waiting for you to reach out first. The one who remembered every little detail about your life slowly stops asking questions. These aren't random changes. They're signs that emotional energy is running out. For a long time, the empath has been carrying responsibilities that should have belonged to both people. They were solving conflicts, fixing misunderstandings, offering reassurance, and trying to keep the relationship alive. But no one can carry that weight forever. Eventually, exhaustion replaces enthusiasm. They no longer have the strength to fight every battle alone. Another warning sign appears when they stop explaining themselves. Earlier, they communicated everything they felt. They talked openly about what hurt them. They searched for solutions instead of blaming anyone. They believed honest conversations could repair almost anything. But after repeating the same concerns again and again, without seeing real change, something inside them begins to shift. They realize that explaining themselves for the 100th time won't suddenly make someone listen. So they stop talking, not because the problem disappeared, because hope did. This silence is one of the most misunderstood stages in any relationship. Many people assume everything is finally peaceful because the empath isn't complaining anymore. But true emotional detachment often sounds exactly like silence. The arguments disappear. The emotional discussions disappear. Even the frustration disappears. What remains is quiet distance. Ironically, this is when many people finally begin paying attention. They notice fewer messages, shorter conversations, and less emotional warmth. Suddenly, they wonder why everything feels different. The answer is simple. The empath has stopped investing where they no longer feel emotionally safe. This doesn't happen after one mistake. It happens after dozens of disappointments, ignored boundaries, broken promises, and moments where their kindness was taken for granted. Little by little, they begin protecting the one thing they neglected for far too long: their own peace. And once an empath starts choosing peace over endless sacrifice, the relationship enters its most dangerous stage. Because the next step isn't louder emotions, it's complete emotional withdrawal. But what finally pushes an empath beyond the point of return? In the next part, we'll uncover the hidden behaviors that quietly destroy their trust, and why, once that trust is gone, rebuilding it becomes almost impossible. The moment everything changes. By the time an empath begins pulling away, the damage has usually been building for months, sometimes even years. Most people assume there must have been one final argument or one unforgettable betrayal that caused everything to collapse. They search for a single event they can point to and say, "That's when everything changed." But that's rarely how it happens. For an empath, the breaking point is almost never one moment. It's the accumulation of hundreds of moments. It's every broken promise that was forgiven, every boundary that was ignored, every apology followed by the same behavior, every conversation that ended with empty promises instead of meaningful change. At first, an empath believes people deserve grace. They understand that everyone makes mistakes. They know that life is difficult, and they genuinely want to believe people can grow. That's why they often forgive more than they should. But forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. Every painful experience leaves a small crack in the foundation of trust. Those cracks may be invisible at first, but they continue spreading every time history repeats itself. Eventually, the empath begins noticing something they once refused to see. The problem isn't a single mistake. The problem is the pattern. And once patterns become impossible to ignore, their perspective starts changing. Another painful realization begins to emerge. They recognize that they've been appreciated more for what they provide than for who they truly are. People value their advice, their patience, their emotional support, their willingness to always understand. But very few stop to ask how the empath is actually feeling. Slowly, they begin feeling less like a loved one and more like an emotional safety net. Someone people depend on without truly valuing. That realization hurts far more than any single argument ever could. Then comes another shift. The empath stops making excuses for people. Instead of saying, "They're just having a hard time," they begin asking themselves, "How long have I been using that excuse?" Instead of believing things will magically improve, they begin looking at actions instead of words. Promises lose their power. Consistency becomes everything. For the first time, they stop focusing on who someone could become and start accepting who that person repeatedly chooses to be. That change is incredibly powerful, because once an empath begins seeing reality instead of potential, they become impossible to manipulate. In the same way again, the emotional fog clears, the guilt disappears, and clarity begins replacing confusion. Suddenly, they ask themselves a question they should have asked long ago. Why am I carrying a relationship that requires two people? The answer changes everything. From that moment forward, they begin reclaiming the emotional energy they spent trying to save someone who wasn't putting in the same effort. They don't become heartless. They become wiser. They don't stop loving. They simply stop sacrificing themselves for people who refuse to value that love. And once that transformation begins, there's one final stage that very few people ever see coming. In the next part, you'll discover what happens after an empath completely detaches emotionally, and why their quiet departure often creates more regret than any argument ever could. When an empath stops caring, everything changes. There comes a moment in every empath's journey when something inside them quietly changes. It isn't fueled by anger, it isn't driven by revenge, and it certainly doesn't happen overnight. Instead, it begins with acceptance. For months or even years, they believed they could fix what was broken. They convinced themselves that if they loved harder, communicated better, or remained patient just a little longer, things would eventually improve. But eventually, reality becomes impossible to ignore. They realize that no amount of love can force someone else to change. No amount of sacrifice can create appreciation where none exists. And no amount of loyalty can save a relationship that only one person is fighting to protect. That realization is both heartbreaking and liberating. Because for the first time in a long time, the empath stops carrying responsibilities that never truly belonged to them. They stop blaming themselves for another person's choices. They stop believing it's their job to fix every conflict. They stop feeling guilty for protecting their own emotional health. This is where real detachment begins. Many people mistake this stage for coldness. They assume the empath has become distant or uncaring. But that's not what has happened. The empath still has compassion. They still wish others well. The difference is that they no longer allow someone else's actions to control their emotional world. Instead of absorbing every problem, they begin observing it. Instead of reacting immediately, they respond with calm. Instead of chasing after people, they let others reveal how much they truly value the relationship. And that's when something unexpected happens. The people who once took the empath for granted finally begin noticing the absence. The daily messages become less frequent. The long conversations disappear. The emotional support that once seemed endless slowly fades away. At first, many assume it's only temporary. They think the empath is simply busy. They expect everything to return to normal, but this time is different. The emotional door that was always open is beginning to close, and once it closes completely, reopening it becomes incredibly difficult. Ironically, this is often the moment when the other person suddenly wants to change. They begin reaching out more often. They apologize. They promise to do better. They ask for another chance. But they fail to realize something important. The empath already gave countless chances. Those conversations already happened. Those tears were already shed. Those warnings were already spoken. The difference is that now the empath has found something they were missing for a very long time: inner peace. And after discovering that peace, returning to constant emotional exhaustion no longer feels like love. It feels like self-betrayal. That's why an empath's departure is rarely loud. They don't always slam doors. They don't seek revenge. They simply stop giving unlimited access to a heart that was repeatedly taken for granted. Their silence becomes louder than any argument ever could. Their absence says what their words never could. And for many people, that's when regret finally arrives. Not because the empath became someone different, but because they finally stopped sacrificing themselves for people who never recognized their value. But the story doesn't end with walking away. In the final part, you'll discover how a broken empath rebuilds themselves, why they never return as the same person, and the powerful lesson that most people realize only after it's far too late. The person who returns is never the same. Many people believe that once an empath leaves, they'll eventually come back exactly as they were. But that's one of the biggest misunderstandings of all. A healed empath may forgive. They may let go of resentment. They may even wish the other person nothing but happiness. But they rarely return with the same heart they once offered so freely. Why? Because pain changes perspective. The experiences that once broke them eventually become the lessons that rebuild them. For years they believed love meant endless patience. They thought being a good person required constant sacrifice. They measured their worth by how much they could endure and how much they could give away. Then, life taught them a different truth. Love without respect becomes emotional exhaustion. Kindness without boundaries becomes self-neglect. And forgiveness without change only repeats the same cycle. That realization transforms everything. The empath begins setting boundaries they once felt guilty for creating. They learn that saying no doesn't make them selfish. Walking away from disrespect doesn't make them cruel. Protecting their peace isn't a betrayal of others. It's a commitment to themselves. As their healing continues, something remarkable happens. They begin recognizing warning signs much earlier. The excuses they once made for unhealthy behavior slowly disappear. Instead of falling in love with someone's potential, they pay attention to consistent actions. Instead of ignoring red flags, they trust their intuition. Instead of proving their value, they expect mutual respect from the very beginning. These aren't walls built out of bitterness. They're boundaries built from wisdom. That's why the healed empath often seems different. They're still compassionate, still generous, still capable of loving deeply. But their kindness is no longer unlimited. It's protected. They understand that healthy relationships require balance. Both people should listen. Both people should support one another. Both people should make an effort. No relationship can survive if one person is constantly carrying the emotional weight while the other simply receives. Perhaps the greatest lesson of all is this: empathy has never been weakness. Choosing patience when you're disappointed requires strength. Choosing understanding when you're hurting requires courage. Continuing to believe in people after being let down again and again takes incredible emotional resilience. But even the strongest heart has limits. Just because someone stays doesn't mean they aren't suffering. Just because someone forgives doesn't mean they haven't been wounded. And just because someone keeps giving doesn't mean they'll continue giving forever. Every act of kindness deserves appreciation. Every loyal heart deserves respect. When those gifts are valued, relationships grow stronger. When they're ignored, exploited, or taken for granted, even the most compassionate person eventually learns to step away. That's why the quietest goodbye is often the most permanent. By the time an empath stops trying, they've usually spent countless nights questioning themselves, hoping things would change, and giving opportunities that no one else ever saw. Their decision isn't impulsive. It's the final chapter of a story that has been unfolding for a very long time. So if you have someone in your life who consistently offers understanding, patience, and unconditional support, don't assume they'll always be there. By the time an empath stops trying, they've usually spent countless nights questioning themselves, hoping things would change, and giving opportunities that no one else ever saw. Their decision isn't impulsive. It's the final chapter of a story that has been unfolding for a very long time. So if you have someone in your life who consistently offers understanding, patience, and unconditional support, Don't assume they'll always be there. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who may need to hear it today. And if you're fascinated by psychology, human behavior, emotional intelligence, and the hidden patterns that shape our relationships, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into the human mind. Because sometimes, understanding people isn't just about learning how they love. It's about recognizing the moment they quietly stop.